We have a long history in this state dealing with wetland mitigation credits, and I think farmers, as the landowner base in the state, of course, are the folks who have engaged in that more than anybody else. I think when this whole thing started, I don't know, geez, when did we start with it? 20 years ago or so? There was some skepticism, and then when the dollar figures started to get really nice for doing wetland restorations, depending on where you are in the state and what the demand was for those credits, a lot of people stood up and took notice. And one of the things that we talk about with ag drainage frequently is the very first thing you need to think about is whether you can actually drain the land. If the water is going to go away, if it's not going to go away, then obviously it starts to call into question whether you should pursue a project. One of the best options financially you can pursue is to restore a wetland and sell mitigation credits. Obviously that's pending lots of things, but recently we have expanded in this state. I say we as the state, not we, myself working for the university. We're not part of the administrative chain of this, but we have expanded the use of wetland restoration mitigation credits on over into agriculture, which has been received fairly well. It's kind of starting to pick up some steam. It's started a little slowly and is moving along now. Most of you probably are familiar that Morton Water and Soil Resources is the administrative home of the Wetland Mitigation Program in the state, and they are also then taking the lead in the ag mitigation program also. So here, as was Alpine, here with Bowser is Lemm to discuss the ag mitigation credit program.
All right, thanks, Brad. At the beginning of this conference this morning, in the introductions, Brad mentioned talking about wetlands, about not draining or staying away. A little bit later, Al talked about not running afoul of swamp buster. And I think everybody here understands that concept now, about being careful not to drain wetlands. What I'm actually here to talk about is another option, and that's the mitigation option that Brad just talked about. We've been working on establishing a wetland mitigation bank specifically for agriculture for probably about 1.5 years now. And as you mentioned, it was a little slow at first, but we've really made a lot of progress and had some significant accomplishments, I guess, to the point where I can stand up here now and describe the whole process from beginning to end for all of you. So we're going to run through quite a bit. Some of the slides I'll go through pretty quickly, just so we can get through somewhat on time. We're going to talk a little bit about the background and history of wetland mitigation, what wetland banking, what it actually is, how to establish a bank site. That's vital because we can't use the bank if we don't have bank sites. So that's a really important part that we need to continue to promote as much as we can. And then we'll talk about the process for using the bank for mitigation, as well as the current status of the bank and some other things that are going on. First of all, just a little history of regulation of wetlands and ag lands. Well, obviously the Federal Clean Water Act goes all the way back to 1972, which has wetland regulatory provisions and mitigation options. The Farm Bill wetland compliance requirements have been in place since '85, and the State Wetland Conservation Act has been around since 1991. A little bit history about mitigation itself. Previously, there was a preference for wetland mitigation in the state for on-site, called project-specific replacement, where every landowner that has a project, a drainage project, will do their own mitigation, likely on their land somewhere. That, what we found, often resulted in some poor wetlands and unsustainable wetlands. People were trying to, cram a wetland in the corner somewhere, and we weren't really getting any benefits out of those wetlands, and that's not good for any of us. USDA mitigation was more primarily reactive to violations or drainage projects after the fact. It wasn't proactive or voluntary. They didn't necessarily promote mitigation, particularly through banking. Now, all that's changed, and wetland banking is preferred under both the state and federal programs, as well as the Corps of Engineers that I mentioned earlier. History of the bank itself, Brad mentioned that Bowser, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, is the state agency with statutory responsibility to implement and administer the State Wetland Bank. That was established or authorized in statute in 1993. And we're basically responsible for everything, with making sure it's in compliance with the rules, establishing easements on the sites, the transactions, inspections, etc. So a little more, well, what is wetland banking? We hear this all the time, and really what it is it's a free market-based structure that allows for replacing multiple wetland impacts with one replacement wetland. So we can have multiple small impacts all going to one larger wetland bank. So here's I guess a perfect example of what we're looking at with the ag bank. And it's balance. It's aimed at replacing, you're all familiar with these types of wetlands, the farm wetlands, small farm wetlands that you're farming through in your fields, maybe cause some problems with you when you're getting out to plant or harvest. And it's allowing flexibility for some of those to get better wetlands and better benefits for the public and for all of us, but at the same time having that balance where we're not encouraging draining the back 40 and new drainage. So let's allow some flexibility for these, get something better out of it, but again, maintain some of that balance. Some of the benefits of wetland banking, it's that alternative to that project specific where every landowner doesn't have to go and do their own project. Everybody doesn't have the opportunity to restore a wetland or create a wetland on their property. And plus the time and the commitment that it takes to do it and the process and getting approvals from governmental agencies takes time for everybody. So it's much more efficient. We can better target restorations that are going to provide multiple benefits, and particularly water quality, wildlife, some of those things that we all value, and larger sites that and complexes that tend to produce more benefits. Banking it's much easier to get a wetland to find sites like this through banking than it is for when everyone has to do a half an acre or an acre themselves. And also those wetlands are, when they're being replaced, they're replaced with pre-established mitigation wetlands. So they're done ahead of time. We know how many credits are out there. The credits can be used to satisfy multiple programs. The approving agencies all agree ahead of time. We're not there after the fact trying, arguing over credit allocation or eligibility. That's all done ahead of time. And it's a single approval and site establishment process rather than having all these multiple processes to go through. So there's a lot of good reasons for it. As far as the ag bank itself, it really started, we've got a great relationship with NRCS. I can't say enough about how good it's been to work with Don Balaun and Paul Flynn and some of the others in NRCS regarding wetland mitigation. And going back to 2009, we had a memorandum of understanding between the two agencies that addressed mitigation, where we both agreed that wetland banking was an acceptable form of mitigation, and we set a goal for having joint standards having joint standards for the bank. 2011, we actually entered into a contribution agreement which included the specific establishment of an agricultural wetland bank. And now just recently here in June, we have another memorandum of understanding that we signed now that actually sets the criteria for the use of the ag bank, as well as it also establishes an exemption that we'll talk more about in a little bit as well. So that partnership has been really important, very, very vital to establishing the ag bank. So why do we need a unique bank for ag? Well, one, it allows us to get credits in areas where they're needed. So in the agricultural areas of the state, we've got high demand now for credits in the ag areas with all the drainage projects that are happening. And again, as I mentioned, mitigation wasn't much of an option before. So there's a lot of those degraded farmed wetlands that are still sitting out there that you know, landowners are working on their drainage projects. Again, it's just more of a demand now for mitigation. Competition improves prices. The more we can get competition for a defined market, the better we're going to have from a price, because a farmer is looking at a different bottom line, I would say, than, let's just say, Walmart or some other types of projects. You know, their willingness to pay isn't going to be the same as a construction or commercial project. So having competition and defining the market to agriculture helps to set that equilibrium of prices for credits and what the ability to pay is. It also allows us to take advantage, some flexibility that's allowed in law for certain types of agricultural projects, and that's really important, and that allows us to do some things I'll talk about in a minute that are much more efficient than the regular process, which all those things make it more efficient. Some of the things I talked about earlier, where it's much easier to buy credits from someone than it is to go through the whole process, each individual landowner. And of course, the ultimate benefit is we're getting more natural resource benefits out of these projects. So how does it actually work? Well, it's similar to a financial bank, where you've got credits instead of dollars. So we have a credit is basically an estimate of wetland function, and we use basically acres as acres of credit as a term to describe that. Transactions similar to a bank, you can have deposits, withdrawals, and transfers. You know, a deposit is made in credits, so when you restore a wetland, you get credits for restoring the wetland. Deposit those credits into the bank based on what you did to restore the wetland. Then you can sell the credits. Withdrawals are when you make a sale. If you're a bank owner and you make a sale to another landowner, then those credits that are sold are withdrawn from the bank. And transfers are just changes in ownership. So maybe I'm a bank owner and I've sold quite a few credits, and I'm to the point where I just as soon get rid of the rest of my credits and get a little bit more money, but I'm willing to sell to my neighbor or another banker. Maybe he needs a few credits for himself, but he'll just buy all of them, and I'm willing to give him a decent price. Then he can sell those credits. Those are all options. So transfers are something that can be done, and it happens from time to time. A replacement plan is basically the application process, where I'm applying to drain this wetland and replace it with these bank credits. And one thing to understand is that the price of credits is negotiated between the buyer and the seller. It's not something that's set by government. It's not something that we can artificially set or mandate when it comes to that sale price. But there are things we can do to help keep the costs down, which in turn then helps landowners be able to keep their credit prices at a reasonable level if there's sufficient competition. So, okay, how do we actually go about establishing a bank site? Well, first of all, just to be eligible for banking credit, for the ag bank, there's really two primary methods to achieve credits. One is where you have a wetland that's been drained, filled, or degraded by cropping that can be now restored. It could be a completely drained wetland, or in the case of this picture, it's a partially drained wetland where in the spring, this wetland fills up, and you can see it's full of ducks and there's a lot of water out there, but in another week or so, that's actually drained down, and this wetland is actually cropped throughout the rest of the summer. So restoring a wetland such as that's one way of achieving credits. Another way, and this is something that's really a good opportunity for the ag bank, and this is where a lot of the focus has been recently, is, and I'll use CRP as the example because that's the most common situation, where you have a conservation program that has restored a wetland, and the program or the contract has expired. Doesn't apply to perpetual easements, but when you have a defined, like CRP, where you've got a contract that lasts 20 or 30 years, once that contract is done and there's wetlands that have been restored on that site, and the contract gives you the right to drain those, you can get credit for saying, okay, you know what, instead of draining those, I'm going to keep it in conservation, and we can allow credits to be allocated for that. And that's, again, that's a great opportunity for the ag bank because it helps keep those costs down. There's not as many costs involved with doing the restoration work. In some cases, there is some restoration work that still needs to be done, but it's not as much as it would be for starting from scratch. Or in many cases, it can just be rolled over as is, right in, assuming that everything's eligible, can be rolled over as is, and you can get credits pretty quickly as well. So that's really a really good opportunity that I think everybody needs to be aware of, and hopefully talking to your neighbors and promoting, because as I mentioned earlier, and you'll hear this again, that if we don't have ag bank sites, we can't use the bank. So it's really important. Just some considerations. Well, obviously it needs to be an eligible site, either restored under a program like CRP or able to be restored. Want to make sure that we're not negatively affecting our neighboring landowners. There's instances where we see this fairly often. The landscape has changed, and with the drainage systems the way they are, we can't just go start, oh, we're going to just plug this ditch and cut that tile off because it might end up flooding the neighbor. So those are things that we need to be aware of. Make sure the land is free of legal encumbrances that would prevent a conservation easement from being applied, and timing. We have to have a landowner that is able and willing, and right now there's a lot of options out there for landowners to be able to utilize their property in other ways and crop it and make a profit off of it, other programs. So that's that's an important consideration for being able to get a site established. So just run through what the steps are for establishing a bank site. Well, we've got an early scoping process that we've developed where you start with your local SWCD staff. A Bowser staff will get involved typically as well, but instead of having everyone that was looking into a potentially establishing a bank site, instead of having to go through the whole application process and expend a lot of money and time and hire consultants if needed, it's a lot easier because we can start with the scoping process. It's basically a 2-page form. Fill out, answer some questions, provide a little bit of additional information, and then we've also got some things process set up to go out and evaluate those sites pretty quickly and give you an answer really quickly as to yes, this is worth pursuing and continuing with, or no, it's not even eligible. And then assuming the scoping goes well and yep, you got a good site here, looks like it's got some promise, then you can complete those application forms, move ahead with getting those approved. Once the plan is approved, there's survey work, title work, there's things that just, some of that legal stuff that goes along with establishing an easement. And in some cases, as I talked about earlier, there's restoration work that might need to be completed. And once that's done, you can submit a request to deposit credits, and the credits are deposited and start selling credits. And we'll talk about how that works in a second here too. There's a lot of things that really have gone into establishing the ag bank, and just a few things I'll point out here, some information that we've developed to help with that. This is just a few of them, but I think a couple of these are on the table back there. We've got a fact sheet about ag banking. There's a U of M sheet that gives options for CRP, expiring CRP, which includes ag banking. Worked with NRCS to have a handout, which I also believe is back there, about alternative use of expiring CRP. So make sure that we're trying to get the word out that landowners have options that include ag wetland banking. That, something that's fairly new, not everybody knows much about banking and knows that this is really an option. We've got some guidance primarily aimed at local government staff and NRCS staff as far as, again, using those CRP type wetlands for allocating credit for them, and as well, this actually goes for both staff and for landowners that are looking for sites to establish. Some guidance about site selection and establishment for the sites themselves. And then a functional assessment tool. I mentioned earlier that we had something that goes along with that evaluation tool, or with the scoping document. And that's the evaluation tool, where we have a functional assessment tool that we designed specifically for agriculture, where we can eliminate a lot of unnecessary questions and focus in on wetland functions typical in agricultural areas. And we have a actual web calculator that NRCS or local government staff can just go out to the site, take some notes, take some information down, look at the site, enter the information into the web calculator, and it'll basically give them the answer right there. So it's a lot easier to provide feedback, very easy to provide feedback to the landowners. The use of the bank for mitigation. And really, using the bank for mitigation really is an agreement to purchase between two landowners. In fact, there actually is a purchase agreement that's part of the process. These are the criteria for using the Ag Bank were just recently established in the MOU that I talked about that was just signed in June. And basically those criteria include farm wetlands, wetlands that are exempt from Wetland Conservation Act, and other degraded ag wetlands determined by that functional assessment tool that I just mentioned. So we can use it not only for establishing the Ag Bank, we use the same tool for determining what's eligible to use the Ag Bank for mitigation. And some of our goals and I'll talk about the specifics of that in just a second, but some of our goals were, as I mentioned earlier, that balance. We want to provide flexibility for those degraded agricultural wetlands, but at the same time, we don't want to reduce protection for those higher quality wetlands or to encourage new drainage of higher quality wetlands. And then of course, using that same functional assessment tool, we can ensure that the functions gained are always going to be more than the functions lost. So we're getting something better out of it. And we've got similar criteria established for farm program participants and non-farm program participants. So for farm program participants, farmed wetlands, FWs, FWPs. A wetland that qualifies for a Wetland Conservation Act Ag exemption. I just mentioned that. Or, and this is trying to get at some of that balance, a wetland, it's not necessarily a farm wetland, but it's just a wetland that's less than 5 acres, bordered by cropland, and is degraded according to that same evaluation tool, agricultural wetland evaluation tool. Or, for NRCS purposes, a converted wetland that would have qualified prior to the conversion. If you're not in the farm program, you don't have a map, you don't have a certified determination that shows that you've got an FW or FWP or something like that. But maybe you used to be. Well, you can, and you still have your certified determination. You can use that map and show, yep, here's what I got. I got it was an FW when I was in the farm program. Prior to the certified determination was when you were still in the program, but you're not now, but you can still use it. Or a wetland on ag land that's been hydrologically modified or cropped prior to January 1st, 1982. That's basically getting at the same thing as an FW, the criteria that NRCS uses to determine an FW. And then again, the same thing, wetland less than 5 acres that's degraded. Some conditions, well, it has to be on existing agricultural land. We're not going out and breaking up and draining the back 40. Wetland size, we're looking at the whole basin. So, you know, yeah, maybe you only have a 1/4 acre on your land, but by draining that, you're going to drain 10 acres on your neighbor's property. So we need to make sure that we're accounting for the whole basin. It must be drained for agricultural use, and it must remain in agricultural use. So we can't, I want to use the flexibility through the Ag Bank, drain it, and maybe next year I'll sell it to Walmart. No, it's legitimately for agricultural use. And of course, the activity is legal and approved by the NRCS or local government unit. Now here's something, you'll see this map a few times here, but bank service areas. So credits are established and sold. The marketplace for those credits are defined by these bank service areas. Bank service areas are based primarily on major river basins. There's a little talk earlier about, you know, the watershed approach, and this is one way to help maintain a focus on watersheds, at least to some degree, And there's also, when going outside of the bank service area is allowed in some cases, but there's some penalties associated with it. I'll talk about the specifics on that in a little bit. Right now, actually. So what the MOU described was, that was just signed in June, was that we're going to use those current existing bank service areas. So they're the same for whichever bank process that you would use. But if you're going to go from one bank service area to another, so if I'm going to go from 9 to 4, your replacement ratio doubles. So the amount of credits that you would need goes up. And it doesn't allow you to go to a non-adjacent bank service area. So example, you couldn't jump from 8 or 9 all the way up to 3. And there's some reasons for that. One, we want to maintain that watershed-based approach and some type of integrity within those watersheds. But we also have to offset the influences of land value and some other factors like that on credit price. It's a lot cheaper to establish a bank set because of land values up in Kitson County than it is down somewhere in southern Minnesota. So without any type of guidance as to where the replacement's going to go, we're going to have a pretty big migration of wetlands going up to Kitson County. Kitson County, doesn't want to replace the whole state's wetlands. Plus, then we start running into issues with watershed integrity. There's also a grandfathered in clause for existing banks. So there's a few banks up north in the northern part of the state that you'll still be able to use the existing procedures for until they run out of credits. We felt that was just a fairness issue since they established those banks before the MOU took effect. The application process, Bowser has developed a much simpler application process for these types for agricultural impacts using the bank than the normal process. I think the normal application is probably 12 pages long. We've got 2 pages and it combines 2 different forms into one. And it eliminates a lot of unnecessary language and questions that don't pertain to ag projects. And it relies on existing information as much as possible. Your 1026, certified determination, those types of things. And that's available on our website. So some of the information, that's one of the handouts back there too. So as you're looking at that application, some of the information you'll need is the location, the description of the project, that's pretty basic. Just details on the wetlands that need to be drained. So if you got your 1026 and that information, or your certified determination, that information is provided in there, and the USDA designation, you've got that covered. Supporting information like drainage maps, your 1026 form, other things like that. And then the bank account from which the credits will be purchased. So the actual steps that you go through to use the bank for mitigation. First of all, and I can't stress this one enough, is the agency contact. To start out with the agency contact. Check with your local NRCS office. If you're not in the farm program, check with your WACA local government unit, usually the SWCD, and find out what you need to do. So make sure you do that first. And then find credits. Contact bank owners and negotiate a price and sign a purchase agreement. Purchase agreement is really important, and I'll talk about how we can find credits in a little bit here. But the part about the purchase agreement is that's important for both you and the banker. It protects both of you. The banker doesn't want to agree, well, first of all, you don't want to have to buy credits until you know that your project's going to get approved. The banker doesn't want to agree to sell credits without having some form of assurance that if your project gets approved, you're actually going to buy them. They don't just change your mind, because he might be losing out on other sale opportunities. So it's important for both of you to have a purchase agreement signed, and the bank owner will have those purchase agreements available. Get the application approved. So you've talked with the NRCS, local government, you've found credits, you've got everything ready to go. You bring it in, you get your application approved, you've submitted all the information, it's approved, now you can go purchase the credits. So you buy the credits from the landowner on the same form. You bring the same form with, and that banker will sign that and fill that form out, and he'll either send it in or he'll have you send it in with the withdrawal fee. send it into us, to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, then we know, okay, we've got, this is all approved, everything's good to go, we can withdraw the credits. Once we withdraw the credits, we'll stamp the exact same form, send that form back to you as the landowner, and we'll copy NRCS and the local governments to let everybody know that, yep, the project's approved. So everything is all on that same form. Then go ahead and do your project. And I mentioned this earlier, I can't stress this enough, but seek advice early. You really need to get in there early, avoid problems and delays later. Some questions, you know, is my project eligible? Is the timeline that I'm thinking going to work out? You know, can you help me find some bank sites that I can use? And do I got this right for how many credits I'm going to need? What else do I need to do? You know, just cover your bases. The available credits are listed on the Bowser website, and we also have a wetland bank mapping tool that you can either get some help from the NRCS or local government staff, or it's pretty simple, you can do it yourself. I'll show you in a second here. And then I mentioned the purchase agreement that you need to sign, and credits can also be purchased from the existing state bank. It's one of the things that we've seen that doesn't really show up in our ag bank numbers is we're seeing that there's an increased amount of sales from agricultural projects going to the existing bank, where we have bankers that are saying, you know, yeah, I kind of want to get in on some of this. I'd be willing to negotiate a little, you know, more reasonable price with that ag landowner. And so again, we're seeing more sales through the regular bank. So don't forget about that as an option. Here's something we have on our website where you can search by the county that you're in, the watershed you're in, the bank service area. You can search specifically just for ag wetland banks. And that'll give you information on banks available, how many credits that they have, etc. Here's the wetland bank mapping tool that I mentioned. With this is something that's fairly new. You can actually turn on the satellite imagery, and you can zoom right into the field that you're planning on draining, or the project area that you're planning on completing. Click right on that exact same field, and you can choose to have it show banks within the minor watershed, the major watershed, the bank service area, the county. You have different options to show depending on where you want to look for banks. And here in this example, I clicked on my project location, and here it shows 3 different bank sites, and it tells you whether they're a regular bank or whether they're an ag bank. And if you can click on one each, you want to click on one of those, and it'll bring up information about the bank owner, contact information, credits, etc. It's you know, it's a really neat tool, and it's really easy to use, and it really helps to get together, as I mentioned earlier, the 2 different landowners, the seller and the buyer. You want to use this and do your homework when you're looking for credits. So for example, up in this area, there's a couple ag banks that aren't too far apart. One of them is Brent Strand, and I think it shows that he's got about 44 acres of credit right now. You might call up Brent, and he says, you know, yeah, it shows I got 44, but I really only have about 20 because I got purchase agreements for these other 24. And these 20, if you want to buy some, you might want to hurry up because I'm getting a lot of calls, so we might want to get a purchase agreement worked out. Or you might call another bank over here. And it's Josh Stromlin's bank, and I think right now he says, it shows he's got 0.17 acres. And Josh will probably tell you, yeah, that's all I got right now, but I'm expecting to get another 15 or 20 acres deposited this fall. So if that works out with your timeline, you got an option there as well. So again, don't just, you know, oh, there's no credits there, or don't assume that there's always going to be credits there. Do your homework, get things set up ahead of time, think ahead. That 2-page application form, as I mentioned, the Bowser debit confirmation stamp goes right on top. That's your proof that their credits have been withdrawn. Where you sign, there's a statement on there that allows NRCS to share information with us about your project. And don't let that scare you off. It's vital. We have to know that, because otherwise we can't withdraw the credits without having the information about the project that's going to be used. So that's how the whole thing works. As long as we're all working together, the whole thing works, because we know that, okay, this project is being proposed for this many acres and it's been approved by NRCS. They're able to share that information with us. We can make the withdrawal and notify everyone else. And this form works for both agencies. There's a section right here for NRCS signature. And here I mentioned the part where the bank owner signs after the credits have been purchased. So all of that's on one form. And again, that's on our website. We make a few tweaks with it with the new exemption that's coming up, but it'll be updated on our website. That confirmation of withdrawal that I mentioned, we'll notify everyone, but just remember that that is your confirmation, that's your proof that you've got the legal right to complete your project and drain that wetland. So keep it safe. You don't want to lose that piece of paper. That's important to have. Someone complains that you're draining a wetland, local government staff or NRCS or DNR conservation officer comes out and checks, you want to make sure that you can show that you've got proof that, hey, this is on the up and up. I'm okay here. I've completed my mitigation. I've got approval for this. A little background of some status of the Ag Bank. These data are from about a month ago, and even at that point, they were probably a little behind, but it at least gives you an idea in the first several months, 6 months or so, of actual establishment of the bank, where it actually we had credits available, that some of the activity that's been going on. So far, we've got 8 actual Ag Bank sites that have been approved, a total of about 414 acres of credit. We got 4 banks, they're the regular banks that said, you know what, I want to get involved with this Ag Bank process as well. I'll take some of my credits, I'll transfer them to the Ag Bank, and I'll agree to limit my sales only to agricultural landowners. So we've allowed that. We don't care where the credits come from. We just want to make sure that there's competition and that there's credits available. So we've got a total of 288 acres of credit that have been deposited to date, with some more on the way. Some of those credits, maybe the CRP doesn't expire until this fall and the credits aren't available till then. Others, there might be some restoration work that still needs to be done. And then as far as withdrawals and use of the credits, there's been more than 55 acres of credit withdrawn, and there's at least, at this point I'm thinking quite a bit more, but at least 100 acres that we know, at least we're estimating, are spoken for under purchase agreements. Based on some of our conversations with some of the bank owners that have said, yeah, I've got quite a few credits, but most of them are already tied up. So there's a lot of interest in the program. And again, I mentioned this earlier, there's also an increased use of the existing Ag Bank, or the existing Wetland Bank for ag projects. So a little bit of a breakdown as to where those credits are. And as you can see, we're in better shape the farther north we get. Up here in the northwest, in the northern part of the Red River Valley, we've got about 270 acres approved, almost half of those deposited, and we've got another 250 acres at least that we're expecting new applications. As you move down in Bank Service Area 4, we've got 127 acres approved and deposited. There's just a few acres in 5. Of course, there's not quite as much agricultural land there, and 9 is our biggest area of need. It's been the toughest nut to crack as far as finding sites and interested landowners. We've got about 5 acres transferred, roughly 26 acres we're expecting applications. We've got a few other potential sites in line, but we'll see how they work out. And then down Bank Service Area 8, we had 17 acres deposited and about 20 acres transferred, and a lot of those, if not most of those, and actually there's been a few more transferred since then, but a lot of those have been used up, or most of them have been used up already. I mentioned this earlier. As part of the MOU, we established a new Wetland Conservation Act exemption. So currently, for many of your projects, you have to gain 2 separate approvals, or potentially 3 if you have the Corps of Engineers in, if it's regulated by the Corps of Engineers. But just for simplicity's sake, we'll keep it to NRCS and WACA, the Wetland Conservation Act, which the local governments implement the Wetland Conservation Act. The Soil and Water Conservation District, sometimes the county, and currently for many of these projects and mitigation projects, many of them require approval by both NRCS and the local government unit. What this exemption does is basically eliminate the need for the dual approvals. So if you're gaining approval by NRCS for your project, using the forms that we've got, using the banks that we've got, you're getting the credit withdrawals, if you do all that, all you need is approval from the NRCS. You don't need to go get separate approval from the other agency. That other agency will be notified of the credit withdrawal, so they'll know, they should know that your project is on the up and up and it's been approved. So we don't need to run you through the ringer twice. And as I mentioned, it does have to be approved by NRCS and using those forms and procedures we just talked about. And obviously, that's a much more streamlined process for landowners. It's more efficient for the program. We can hopefully have, NRCS, they have to approve your drainage projects anyways under the farm program. So hopefully they can focus on that. And the intent is that our staff and our local government staff maybe can have a little more time to focus on getting more bank sites established. That exemption takes effect August 7th. So we'll have some additional directions and some updates to some of our forms that we'll be doing about that same time as well. So some of the next steps we got, well, we've got I just mentioned updating some of our forms and guidance. We're going to do some interagency staff training, make sure everybody's aware of all these things that we've talked about. We've already done a lot of training, but we want to keep everybody up to speed with the new changes. Continue the interagency coordination and partnerships that I talked about. As I mentioned, our partnership with NRCS is extremely important, and we're actually working with the Corps of Engineers and hopefully trying to find ways where there are projects that are regulated by the Corps of Engineers under their jurisdiction that we can have a little more efficiency on that end of things as well. And as I mentioned, this is the most important part, is promoting ag banks and getting more sites established. We need to have ag banks in order to use the ag bank. And if you look, as I showed the credit availability earlier, there's a general need for credits in all of the bank service areas, particularly the ag areas of the state, but the need becomes greater as you move to the south. And really down here in bank service areas 9 and 8, and particularly 9, there's our areas of greatest need. One of the things that we've run into in looking for sites, talking with landowners, is many landowners are interested. And yep, they've got a great site, it's eligible, but when it comes down to it, banking is hard to describe. And you don't have a defined payment like you do with some type of a conservation program. You can't look and say, well, if I put it into cropping, this is what I'm going to get out of it for a return on my investment over the years. It's a little harder to judge when somebody asks, well, how much do I sell my credits for, and how many am I going to sell the first year? That was a little hard to answer. At first, I guess my answer was always, well, how many people do you know that have a farmed wetland? How many landowners, ag landowners, that have a farmed wetland on their land? That's a lot. Okay, well now, that person can call up Brent Strand, they can call up Josh Drama, they can call up John Mariska and ask them, hey, how has it worked for you? Brent Strand has sold almost 100 acres in less than a year. So it's working well. So now we've got something to point to. And what we really need here is, everybody from the government agencies to the ag groups and everyone else to really promote this. We talked a lot earlier about multi-purpose and achieving multi-goals. Well, Red Green's here to say that ag banking fits right in with those concepts. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. There's a lot more bank sites that need to be established. And it's going to take, as I mentioned, all of us, from the agencies to the ag groups to the individual landowners, yourself looking at, hey, maybe I've got a site here that would work, or I've got some CRP that's going to be expiring and there's some restored wetlands on it, or maybe my neighbor does I can talk to. That's what's going to take to really get the program working as well and efficiently as it has the potential to do. And ultimately, I really do believe that mitigation is something that we can all come together on, and it's a win-win for agriculture and conservation. Again, getting back to what we talked about earlier, we're getting something better out of it, plus you're able to complete your drainage projects as planned without causing problems for our resources. I don't think we have time for questions, but at this point, we do? Okay, we can take a few questions, I guess. And then otherwise, if not, I'll be around as well here for a while so I can catch, and then you can talk with me as well as there's a lot of information on our website. It's www.bowser.state.mn.us.
Does that land still remain private?
Yeah, the question is about the bank site. Does the land still remain private? The answer is yes. So let's just say I want to establish an ag bank site, and I've got, maybe it's CRP that's expiring, that I've got some restored wetlands on that I can get some credits for. I still own the land. I can still use it. I can still hunt on it, fish, bird watch, camp, whatever. I just can't drain it. I can't farm it. I can't do things that would degrade the wetland, but I can still use it for other purposes. So it'd be similar to what the restrictions are for CRP. You can't do some of those things in CRP. There's a conservation easement that's placed on the land, and that easement says it's going to stay in conservation for forever, or as long as we can see into the future, anyways. And but again, the land stays private. It can be bought, it can be sold, it can be given to your kids, and it can be used for those other purposes, hunting and fishing and those types of things.
Your wetland banking map tool,
Yeah.
is it on that website, or how do you
Yes.
use
Yeah, it's on. In fact, that's something, if anybody wants to see at some point here, I could even, over lunch or something, I could pull it right up on our laptop. But if you go on the Bowser website, and it's right under, click on wetlands, and then there's a column for wetland banking, and it says right there, it's right there, the wetland bank map tool. So it's easy to find, and it's really easy to use. It can take you, a minute to figure it out. And again, you can zoom right into your property. The question was, what are the credits costing? And that's a little difficult to answer because that's a private transaction. But from what we're hearing, let's see, depending on where you're at in the state here, we're hearing the ag credits are going anywhere from about $7,000 an acre down to, maybe 13, 14 at the high end down here. So, and that's just going to depend on, on the bank owner, the location of the state, and of course it's going to depend on, the more banks that we get established, the more competition we have, and that all improves prices as well.